The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. A big welcome to you all on the occasion of this first webinar on the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manley P. Hall. This and all subsequent webinars on the Secret Teachings will be available on makara.us in the Moria Federation webinar section under its own subheading just below the Secret Doctrine link shown here.
No.
The Secret Teachings, yeah?
You haven't shown your screen yet.
Oh, goodness. What an oversight. Hang on, folks. Okay.
And while you're doing that, I added you already to the index there on Makara.
Well, that's good. Good. Everything.
There you go. Now we can see you.
Okay, well, that means that the rest of the series is going to go perfectly because you always have to have a rocky start to get it going. So here we are again. So here we are with the Makara webpage, and you see up there the Moria Federation webinars, and the Secret Teachings will be just below the Secret Doctrine webinars. Okay, so Secret Teaching of All Ages was published in 1928 by 27-year-old Manley P. Hall, who was to become a lifelong lecturer and collector of rare esoteric manuscripts. Here's the library that MPH set up to house his personal collection, which eventually became the Philosophical Research Society, in which he gave over 8,000 lectures in his 70-year career of lecturing. He also authored and published dozens of books, the most famous of which is The Secret Teaching of All Ages, whose subtitle is, you ready for this? An encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy, being an interpretation of the secret teachings concealed within the rituals, allegories, and mysteries of all ages. As fulsome as this title is, it only scratches the surface of what MPH actually covers in this amazing volume. For the limited Diamond Jubilee edition, published on the 60th anniversary of the original in 1988, which I was lucky enough to get a copy of, MPH states in the last two paragraphs of his preface, and could we get a reader for this? We'll start off the reading.
The really tiny print or the...
No, of course not. To the left. Yeah, it's a test.
Okay, I'm actually going to read it for you. We are now coming to the end of the 20th century, and the great materialistic progress which we have venerated for so long is on the verge of bankruptcy. We can no longer believe that we are born into this world to accumulate wealth and abandon ourselves to mortal pleasures. We see the dangers and realize that we have been exploited for centuries. We were told that the 20th century was the most progressive that the world has ever known, but unfortunately the progression was in the direction of self-destruction. To avoid a future of war, crime, and bankruptcy, the individual must begin to plan his own destiny, and the best source for the necessary information comes down to us through the writings of the ancients. We have tried to select the most useful and practical elements of the classical idealism, combining them into a single volume. It is our sincere hope that this book will endure into the 21st century and continue to make available the contents of countless books destroyed by the ravages of war. This volume is not devoted to my opinions, but is a tribute to the memories and labors of the noblest of mankind. May the 21st century bring with it a restoration of those systems of inspired instruction so desperately needed. Manley P. Hall, Los Angeles, California, 1st of October, 1988.
Thank you, BL. MPH was 87 when he wrote this. He lived a few more years. So now let's take a quick look at the first few lines of the original preface, where we'll discover how important it was for MPH to create a beautiful and grand presentation of the ageless wisdom teachings. Can we get a reader for this, please? Just the part, always the part that's
the easy part to read. Allison, can you read that for us, please? I can't hear her, so okay. So let's go to Barbara. Can you read that for us, please? Okay. Bob, can you read that for us, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Numerous volumes have been written as commentaries upon the secret systems of philosophy existing in the ancient world, but the ageless truths of life, like many of the earth's greatest thinkers, have usually been clothed in shabby garments. The present work is an attempt to supply a tome worthy of those seers and sages whose thoughts are the substance of its pages. To bring about this coalescence of beauty and truth has proved most costly, but I believe that the result will produce an effect upon the mind of the reader which will more than justify the expenditure.
Thank you, Bob. So, since it was important to MPH, we'll take just a couple of minutes to admire the book itself before settling into its contents for the rest of this webinar series. This limited edition of the Secret Teachings measures approximately 13 by 19 inches and weighs 4 kilograms. That's 9 pounds. MPH commissioned the artist J.A. Knapp to do a series of paintings, they're listed there on the right, which appear opposite the beginning of each chapter, as shown here. But to my mind, it's the illustrations from many and varied sources that have the most fascinating esoteric content. Okay, as during the Secret Doctrine webinars, please feel free to ask questions or make comments at any time. You can also type in your comments. You could either raise your hand in your little control panel there, just click on the hand icon, or you can type in the chat box if you prefer to have BL read your question or comment. So before we read about the frontispiece opposite the title page, let's take a look at a close-up of MPH's amazing signet or seal. You see where it appears there in the bottom on the right. It's complete with that hand of God holding an Ouroboros, around which is coiled wheat and what looks to be like an olive branch. Okay, it's no surprise, given MPH's interest in secret societies, that the seventh ray master Rakowski, who was the Lord of Civilization, also known as the Comte de Saint-Germain, is the subject of the frontispiece of the Secret Teachings of all ages. Can we get a reader for the text that appears below the plate?
Chuck, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. The great initiate who turned himself to the Comte de Saint-Germain must not be confused with the French general of the same name. For the Wonderman, as Monsieur de Saint-Germain was often called, was not a scion of the French family. theory long held that he was a Portuguese Jew who has now been discarded as untenable. The most reasonable conclusion regarding his birth is that he was the legitimate son of Franz Leopold, Prince Rákóczi of Transylvania. In fact, the Comte de Saint-Germain appeared in Leipzig in 1777 as Prince Rákóczi. He also admitted to Prince Karl of Hesse, and then he was the son of Prince Rákóczi, and that he was raised and educated by the last Duke de Medici. The contradictory nature of the data regarding the Comte de Saint-Germain is strikingly evidenced by several chronological inconsistencies. It is generally supposed this mysterious adept was born in 1710, but the Countess von Gergy declared that she had seen him during that year in Venice, and that he appeared to be between 45 and 50 years of age at that time, while the church register in Eckernford contains a record of his death in 1784. It is known that he was seen on several occasions subsequent to that date, having attended a Masonic conference in 1785 and having been recognized in Venice in 1788. The last historical mention of the Comte de Saint-Germain was in 1822, at which time he was presumably on the eve of embarking for India.
Okay, thank you. So just the number of years spanned, you know, if you go from 1710, him being 45 or 50, that would put his birth, you know, somewhere in the mid 17th century, 1660 or so. And then we have 1822, which he was alive and well, embarking for India. So he is said to have lived centuries, which the masters are capable of doing. Okay, now let's explore the painting that appears opposite the introduction, called Group of World Religions. Could we get one reader to read through the text that accompanies the next several close-ups of the painting? I'll pause briefly after each reading so you can relate the description to the painting. In most cases, the location of the close-up is shown at the right. So could we get a reader for this series of short readings?
Michael S., can you do that for us, please?
There, at the left of the plate stands Mohammed, holding aloft pages from the Quran, his left foot upon an image which he has overthrown. Behind Mohammed, the celestial bowl, signifying the constellation of Taurus, opens the egg of the year with his horns. At the lower right is a bas-relief of the Persian sun god, in an attitude signifying the conquest of the sun over the celestial bowl at the ancient vernal equinox. In the center stands the high priest of Israel, his right arm encircling the base of the seven-branched candlestick, the mosaic symbol of the planetary governors of the world. To his right is the statue of the golden calf, and to his left, the robed figures of the Greek mystics bearing a tripod in which burns the sacrificial fire. Behind the bull Apis, crowned with the lunar globe, and Father Nile bearing the horn of plenty and pouring the waters of life from his urn, loom the pyramids, the great Egyptian temples of initiation. In the clouds at the left is the seated figure of Jupiter Ammon, brandishing a flaming thunderbolt and horned to signify that he partakes of the attributes of the zodiacal ram. In the heavens appears the mystery of the apocalypse. The four creatures of Ezekiel's vision surround an altar upon which is the book of the seven seals and the Lamb of God. At the upper left is the band of the zodiac. The constellations of Taurus, Aries, and Pisces represent the stellar influences which, to the ancients, descending upon the earth, are responsible for the establishment of the religions and philosophical institutions herein set forth.
Thank you, Michael. So any thoughts or questions about this painting? It's really a grand illustration in the old sense of the word, where painters were commissioned to illustrate specific themes. Okay, on to the introduction. Could we get a reader for this first paragraph?
Francis, can you read that, please? I don't hear him. Okay, we'll try somebody else. Jeremy, can you read that, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Philosophy is the science of estimating values. The superiority of any state or substance over another is determined by philosophy. By assigning a position of primary importance to what remains when all that is secondary has been removed, philosophy thus becomes the true index of priority or emphasis in the realm of speculative thought. The mission of philosophy a priori is to establish the relation of manifested things to their invisible ultimate cause or nature.
Thank you. So thoughts or questions? Of course, philosophy is a lot more than hierarchical categorization, but with a little reflection, we can see the profound implications of a truly esoteric categorization. The fact that HPB's absolute stands fundamentally and absolutely beyond all manifestation is an example of how hierarchical categorization is intrinsic to esoteric philosophy. It should be noted that the Secret Teachings was published just 3 years after a treatise on cosmic fire, at the height of the popularity of the Theosophical movement based on HPB's secret doctrine. Both of these works introduced to the West a revelatory philosophy of esoteric hierarchical categorization. Okay. The next paragraph is a real doozy. Using no less than 14 quoted sources, it shows both the diversity and something of the intrinsic unity of philosophy throughout the ages. Could we get a reader for this? Somebody who has no problem with names like Leibniz and Descartes. Anybody can handle this, actually.
And this is Keith. I'll read it.
Oh, great, Keith. Thank you.
But I don't guarantee that I don't have problems with Leibniz and Descartes.
Hey, that sounded good enough to me.
Philosophy, writes Sir William Hamilton, has been defined as the science of things divine and human, and of the causes in which they are contained, Cicero. The science of effects by their causes, Hobbes. The science of sufficient reasons, Leibniz. The science of things possible, inasmuch as they are possible, Wolff. The science of things evidently deduced from first principles, Descartes. The science of truths, sensible and abstract, de Condillac. The application of reason to its legitimate objects, Tennemann. The science of the relations of all knowledge to the necessary ends of human reasons, Kant. The science of the original form of the ego or mental king, Krug. the science of sciences, Fichte, the science of the absolute, von Schelling, the science of the absolute indifference of the ideal and real, von Schelling, or the identity of identity and the non-identity, Hegel. See lectures on metaphysics and logic.
Thanks, Keith. Well, that's quite a paragraph. Any thoughts or questions before we jump into this? It's interesting that 11 out of the 12 philosophers quoted describe philosophy as a science. So we're going to drill down just a bit into this paragraph. Let's start by grouping these philosophers according to the schools that they either founded or represented. First, we have the Stoic, Cicero, who defined philosophy as the science of things divine and human, and of the causes in which they are contained. This last phrase suggests to me an esoteric understanding of causality. Even the divine, Cicero seems to be inferring, is contained within and thus emanates from causal realms, suggesting that beingness always stands in a causal relationship to beings, no matter how exalted, including even those entities that we consider divine. This is not foreign thinking to the Greeks. There are many of his predecessors who held these views. Any thoughts or questions about this concept? Just jump in at any time if you do have a thought. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the empiricists. Thomas Hobbes was the predecessor, and Etienne de Condillac was a champion of John Locke's philosophy of empiricism, which states that knowledge comes only or primarily from sensory experience. Empiricism promotes objective observation and the scientific method. De Condillac described his point of view as sensationism, suggesting that all things must be experienced through the senses. It's important to be aware of the philosophical school when considering these quotes. For example, because he was an empiricist, the reference to causes in Hobbes' statement, the science of effect by their causes, very probably refers to physical and not metaphysical causes. Next up, we have the three rationalists quoted in PH's statement. Rationalists hold, in contrast to the empiricists, that the truth cannot be gained through sensory perception, just an opposite viewpoint, but can only be arrived at through intellectual deduction. This allows for subjective causality and thus for more metaphysical perspective. For example, the word reason in Leibniz's definition of philosophy as the science of sufficient reasons refers to non-physical causality. His expanded quote states, "There must be a sufficient reason for anything to exist, for any event to occur, for any truth to obtain." But if you read into Leibniz a little bit, you find that his reason is synonymous with causation, as in the reason for manifestation. His use of the word sufficient means adequate or commensurate, as in there must be a commensurate cause for, quote, anything to exist or for any event to occur. This directly points to unseen causality. More could be said, but let's move on to Wolff's statement. The science of things possible inasmuch as they are possible, to my mind, suggests a recognition, either conscious or unconscious, of cosmic law, which inherently embraces all things possible, right? Descartes' statement, the science of things evidently deduced from first principles, seems to embrace causality, first principles. But we quickly discovered that Descartes' first principles are not the metaphysical absolute, but rather cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, thus stating in one sentence his two primary principles: I think and I exist. Ram Dass famously turned the subject and object of the sentence around, saying, I am, therefore I think, which is perhaps more in keeping with the esoteric perspective, though arguably not as philosophically rigorous. Any thoughts or questions about any of these philosophers thus far? Anyone? Okay. Next up, and we're moving more and more into the esoteric as we move along here. We have the transcendental idealists. Tineman was a follower of Immanuel Kant, who had some interesting ideas. For example, Kant believed that there was a supreme principle of morality, which he called the categorical imperative, a kind of enlightened version of the golden rule. It states, act as you would want all other people to act towards all other people. Act according to the maxim that you would wish all other rational people to follow, as if it were a universal law, suggesting to me that Kant was himself tapping into this universal law. Whereas the empiricist John Locke stated, no man's knowledge can go beyond his experience, Immanuel Kant says, it is beyond a doubt that all our knowledge begins with experience. So Wilhelm Krug, the last of these transcendental idealists, wrote extensively on the relationship between consciousness and being, stating that being can only be known to us through its presentation to us in our own consciousness. This is in keeping with esoteric thought up through the early initiations, but is transcended by the Master Dwal Kul's concept of identification, at which point consciousness itself is transcended. For those of you who are not familiar with Dwal Kul, he's the he worked with Alice Bailey to write a series of esoteric books. Most of you I know are familiar with this work. Okay, the last group is the German idealists. Johann Fichte developed the concept of self-awareness. You know, some of these ideas we just take for granted now, but it wasn't really talked about until Fichte came up with it, and was the originator of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which is a whole system of thought in itself. But it is with von Schelling that we finally get into truly metaphysical philosophy. Von Schelling, also known just as Schelling, described philosophy as the science of the absolute and the science of the absolute indifference of the ideal and real. In this latter statement, he reveals his occult awareness, made even more evident by his next statement, which is, nature is visible spirit, spirit is invisible nature. I think most of us have heard this quote. And I love this one, there is in every man a certain feeling that he has been what he is from all eternity, and by no means become such in time. You could add in time and space. So whether or not he was aware of the fact, these statements mark von Schelling as a true occultist. Finally, we have the much more renowned Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Seems like a lot of these philosophers had four names, who describes philosophy as the identity of identity and non-identity. Hegel believed that being, identity, and nothing, non-identity, somehow combined to form becoming, which he believed to be a superior state to, quote, mere being. This went against Aristotle's belief that being is identical with itself, which seems an obvious conclusion. But when we amend the statement to reflect the esoteric understanding, it becomes all beings and all being is identical with itself. And thus each of us is in essence that identicality, which is the absolute, not is but me. But Hegel didn't take it that far. He is right in saying that becoming stands in a causal relationship to physical existence, but definitely out of step with esoteric teaching in his assertion that becoming transcends beingness. Thoughts or questions on this? All these philosophers, even the empiricists, had phenomenal intellectual stature, often being just as well known in other disciplines as they were in philosophy. For example, Cicero was a Roman consul. Leibniz invented differential and integral calculus. And Descartes had a vision in which he was given the precepts of analytical geometry. You can see in the last two examples the strong tie between philosophy and fifth-ray analysis. What set the transcendentalists and German idealist schools apart from the empiricists was the further development of their philosophy through the use, consciously or not, of the abstract mind, and for a few, such as possibly Fichte and von Schelling, of the intuition. Before continuing with the text, let's take a look at the illustration at the center of page 13, there on the right, called Babbitt's Atom, named after Dr. Edwin D. Babbitt. But first of all, do we have any thoughts about these philosophers? This all is derived from this second paragraph where he lists all these philosophers and their description of what for them philosophy is. Any thoughts about this before going on? Okay, then we'll move on to Babbitt's Atom, which is named after Dr. Edwin D. Babbitt. This illustration is from Babbitt's book, Principles of Light and Color. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Risa, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, I can. From Babbitt's Principles of... Since the postulation of the atomic theory by Democritus, many efforts have been made to determine the structure of atoms and the method by which they unite to form various elements. Even science has not refrained from entering this field of speculation and presents for consideration most detailed and elaborate representations of these minute bodies. By far the most remarkable conception of the atom evolved during the last century is that produced by the genius of Dr. Edwin D. Babbitt, and which is reproduced herewith. The diagram is self-explanatory. It must be borne in mind that this apparently massive structure is actually minute as to defy analysis. Not only did Dr. Babbitt create this form of the atom, but he also contrived a method whereby these particles could be grouped together in an orderly manner and thus result in the formation of molecular bodies.
So thoughts or questions about this, which comes directly from the secret teachings?
I just want to say it looks like the heart.
It does, doesn't it? It's interesting that way. Yeah. Here's the book, by the way, Principles of Light and Color, wherein Babbitt's Atom was originally published, along with some of the illustrations from this book. We might be tempted to write Babbitt's atom off as an interesting but not particularly accurate 19th century hypothesis, except for the fact that it was reprinted on page 1181 of a treatise on cosmic fire, along with the original description from Babbitt's Principles of Light and Color, which reads, "The general form of an atom, including the spirals and first spirillae, together with influx and efflux ethers, represented by dots that pass through these spirillae. The second and third spirillae, with their still finer ethers, are not shown. Its appearance in TCF, along with its depiction of the spirillae, was enough for me to give Babbitt's idea credence. Indeed, the inclusion of spirillae suggests that this figure was not meant to represent a physical plane atom, which modern science tells us doesn't look like Babbitt's atom at all, but rather its etheric counterpart, with an emphasis on how the life energy circulates through an atom." Any thoughts or questions about this?
Yes, we have a question from Pepper. She says, "I'm curious as to why MPH laid out this information first and in this order. What foundation is he trying to lay? Saint-Germain, world religion, philosophy, and Babbitt's atom?"
Yeah, okay. I'll attempt to make some sense for you of that. The illustrations in color plates, well, first of all, the fact that the plate of Saint-Germain was opposite the title page, I think is because he is the seventh ray master, and Manley P. Hall was very involved in Masonic, which is ruled by the seventh ray, as well as other secret societies, all of which, because the seventh ray is a ceremonial order and organization, is very connected with all secret societies. So he honored that great seventh ray master. And also because as the Lord of Civilization, in a way, he oversees the entire development of the civilized world, which MPH is actually championing with this book. The reason that philosophy and a little bit of the history of philosophy is the subject of the introduction is because, well, basically the entire book is about philosophy. So he's giving examples of some of the esoteric tenets of philosophy in the introduction to kind of set us up for recognizing and understanding philosophy. Babbitt's atom appearing here is, you could say, out of sync, but you'll find that a lot with illustrations, especially in earlier books, that they're where they will fit. And in this case, I see no direct correlation to the subject matter. There are in some of his other illustrations, if anyone else perceives a correlation between the atom and and this introduction to philosophy. I appreciate your idea. This is a bit far-fetched, but the soul develops the fifth and sixth spirillae, which is that by which we come into awareness of the soul energies, specifically the laws of magnetic impulse or laws of polar union, and that energy is made available to us through these spirillae. But I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think he was enamored of this illustration and wanted to feature it in the beginning of his book. So not a complete explanation. That's probably the best I can do.
Good one. I have a little bit
Yeah,
Francis. Yeah, just a little bit. It is, as you say, an etheric atom, and it pertains to the first subplane of the etheric plane. And and as you know, they get simpler and simpler as we rise through the various subplanes of the etheric plane, of the cosmic physical plane. The final item on the cosmic physical plane is called, it's by a strange name called the bubble in the koilan. And it said, I think in the first Principles of Theosophy by Gennaro Giudassa, I believe, the structure of this particular atom that we're looking at. And by the way, Babbitt was closely affiliated with Master KH. So he wasn't just talking through his hat, you know.
Yeah.
There's said to be 14 million, I hope it's not billion, but I think it's million, bubbles in the koilan in this particular atom. And that's sort of the fundamental building block on the cosmic physical plane, but it becomes less and less and less. And as you suggested, the different spirillae have to do with the different stages, the activation of them, with the different stages of man's progress and the degree of his evolution. So this is actually an extremely, I think when the ether, which has been dispensed with in that Michelson-Morley experiment, you know, when it's rediscovered in a new way, that the value of this depiction of the atom will resurface and be accepted. It is not physical, but it is in a way archetypal, and that's maybe why maybe why on the etheric plane, you know, philosophy has to do with the archetypes and the descent of the archetypes and the relation of all things to the archetypes. So this is the archetypal world, at least the one that's close at hand, you know, that he's being depicted here. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting stuff, you know, around this.
Yeah.
And we just have to go etheric, you know.
Yeah. It's not physical, but it is structural. In that
well
it is
structured.
A system, you know, of distributing energy.
And it's the earth. It's, you know, in cosmic fire, there's 5 different atoms or 6 different atoms. The atom of substance, there is man, the atom, planetary logos, the atom, solar logos, the atom. And they all have some kind of analogous structure to this thing, those torrents, influx, efflux. There's a lot of similarity.
Yeah. And if you think of it, instead of the literal depiction, I mean, you know, he did what he could. He probably had a vision. But it's to recognize that it is a system that allows for the distribution of graded life energy. You know, it's really extraordinary that he was able to bring it into an illustration.
And he may have gotten a little help from his friends, you know.
Yeah,
you know how DK he was always showing. DK was showing Blavatsky the charts, and who knows what KH offered. Yeah.
In line with that, Britta says, always thought that this was part of the studies of Ledbetter and Besant. What is that relationship?
You know, between Ledbetter and Besant, relationship of what? Between this atom and them?
Yeah, how they were all.
They would have certainly been aware of Babbitt's work, and they were, you know, they were both had, well, it's suggested by their writings that they had vision, and so would have been able to perceive something of this, whether it was exactly this form or not. Certainly they would have been sympathetic to the idea of a system of distribution like this.
Yeah. You know what? He wrote the book Occult Chemistry, right? The two of them together wrote Occult Chemistry, which is a very ponderous tome. And I think you couldn't really write a book like that without reference to the atom of this structure. So that where I got my information was, the president of the Theosophical Society at a certain time, Gennaro Jadasa. But this is different, and Occult Chemistry was the sort of granddaddy book from which other people drew simpler explanations. So I think it's part of Occult Chemistry, basically, their presentation there.
It would be an interesting book to look at. I haven't ever looked at that. Yeah. Leadbeater's Besant's book. They did a lot. They worked a lot together. And DK gave a nod to Besant. He said of all the Theosophists, which many had fallen into glamour, that Besant was able to hold her head, above and produce useful work, And for DK, useful work is the highest praise, Okay, since Spirillae, here shown as the coils enclosing a continuous spiral, plays an important part in DK's teaching, let's take a closer look. This is basically the bottom and the top of the atom I just showed you, see there, the positive and negative end there in a close-up so you can see the coils better. Let's see. Okay. So, what is a spirilla? By the way, spirillae is it's kind of like octopi, right? It's the plural of spirilla. So just so you know, in case you don't pick anything else up from this webinar, you'll know that at least. So, what is a spirilla? Babbitt says, an atom with its intensity of lifelike action has its spirals and spirillae in the form of tubes within which are still finer ethereal juices, which constitutes its most interior life force. So, according to Babbitt, spirillae allow for the circulation of, quote, ethereal juices, which constitute an atom's most interior life force. DK calls these juices fluids, right? And they are electrical in nature. So you have phohatic energy involved here, this circulation of phohatic fluid. In figure 133, which you see on the bottom right there, we discovered that there are finer spirillae coiling around the larger spirilla. Could we get a reader for this section, please?
Okay. Leah, can you read that for us, please?
Thank you. Figure 133 presents the main spiral which passes around the atom, then a subspiral which encircles the main spiral. This may be called the first spirilla or little spiral. Judging by nature's usual law of trinal gradations, there is probably a still finer spirilla that encircles this first one, which may be called the second spirilla, and another which encircles the second one, more minute still, and properly constituting the third spirilla. The different grades of forces that flow along this spiral and these spirillae must pass around the atom in the same direction, just as the sun, planets, and moon all move along through space in the same direction, namely from west to east.
Okay. Thoughts or questions on this? Babbitt recognized that there are, quote, different grades of forces that flow along this spiral and these spirillae. DK teaches us that there are, in fact, 10 levels of spirillae, representing 10 grades of force, 3 major and 7 minor. He says, the personality ray deals with the correspondence to the lower quaternary and its stimulation by the ego. Wait a minute. oh, I'm sorry, I missed the line. The personality ray deals with the first four spirillae and is the source of their stimulation. Note here the correspondence to the lower quaternary and its stimulation by the ego. The egoic ray concerns itself with the fifth spirilla and with the sixth, and is the cause of their emerging from latency and potentiality into power and activity. The monadic ray is the source of the stimulation of the seventh spirilla. But wait a minute, where is this influence being applied? What atom or atoms are we talking about? DK says the personality ray has direct action upon the physical permanent atom. The personality ray, remember, which influences the first four spirillae. The egoic ray, which influences the fifth and sixth spirilla, has a similar action upon the astral permanent atom. In the monadic ray, which works with the seventh spirilla, has a close connection with the mental unit. So it's not only different spirillae, but it's also different permanent atoms that in which these higher grades of spirillae are influenced or come to life as a result of the influence of the ray. I know this sounds incredibly technical, but from one source, you're really getting an insider view into the esoteric workings of the nature of the flow of life energy on these different levels. So any thoughts or questions about anything we've covered so far? Additionally, DK tells us that the spirillae are responsible for, quote, the development of the inner latent heat and its gradual fiery increase until we have within the atom a repetition of what is seen within the causal body, the destruction of the periphery of the atom by means of burning.
Francis?
Yeah.
Britta asks, relating to the seven rays?
Yeah. Oh, that's the question. That's interesting. I don't remember any direct teaching as to how the spirillae are affected by ray, but I would imagine that, for instance, the odd rays would be more responsible for the physical permanent atom and the mental permanent atom, and the even rays more for the astral permanent atom. Do you have any thoughts on that, Michael?
I have a thought about, if it's sort of on my mind at the moment, maybe it'll lead into something. There's a problem on the mental plane because there are 7 spirillae in the etheric permanent atom, 7 in the astral permanent atom, but only 4 in the mental unit, and all the triadal permanent atoms only have 3. So we have to somehow find a way to put together the mental unit with the mental permanent atom, and maybe that's what the Antikarana does, giving you 7, that the monadic ray can deal with. Otherwise, you're dealing with the triad, and they only have 3. And I think that in terms of rays 1, 2, and 3, the monadic influence works upon those 3 rays.
Yeah,
those 3. Yeah.
You can't imagine that the ray of the monad isn't predominant, in terms of influencing one of those 3 spirillae, but it's a guess.
I think it may be correct that the the first Spirilla would be influenced there particularly. I think so. Yeah. Anyway, probably these different atoms are colored differently according to the different rays that play upon them. And we out of a permanent atom, you can get any ray you want, but if they're basically influenced by the higher types of energies, the quality of the higher type of energy will have an effect on at least the coloration of those atoms. But in terms of being able to go 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm not sure we can do that. When it comes to the fifth Spirilla, I think it's the higher mental plane. When it comes to the sixth Spirilla, I think it's the spiritual triad as a whole.
Yeah.
And then, something like that.
I think so. Yeah, it's very likely. Also, he does give this teaching that there are actually 3 major and 7 minor Spirillae. And it could be that, once you moved into triadal realms, monadic influence, that you're talking about the 3 major. It's very much like the tree of life, where you have
Exactly. And then the monad itself is threefold, really, from a certain perspective. So we can combine that, but it definitely is the top of the Kabbalistic tree, those 3 above the 7. I think so.
I think so. Yeah. And if you notice in this illustration to the left that you have these 3 that stand out. And, so it could those are the spiral vehicles for those higher 3, or those, what you could call them, the Spirillae of aspect and attribute, right? Possibly. We're just guessing here, but if you do a little bit of the as above, so below, you could imagine that could be the case, because between those you have 7 Spirillae. If you see the 3 that stand out,
3, 7, yeah, and probably it'll turn out to be 21 after all, and 22. Probably the numbers are going to add up, and probably the 3 aspects of the monad are affecting the 3 aspects of the triad. They're very close. So and also the structure. On the monadic plane, you can have any one of 7 monadic rays, but once those rays break free, you can only have 3. So again, it's 3 above the 7.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's interesting to look at some of these headings. Like you could see at the top, it says on the left, electrical colors. And then in the middle, it says thermal colors, right? And you have others that it give you a little more indication, like intra-spirals and extra-spirals. Those are the 2 types of spirals that Michael and I were just discussing. The 3 are the extra spirals, and the intra-spirals are the 7 in between them, right? I actually did a 3D model of this in a 3D program. It took me about a month. And it actually worked. That is to say that, the spirals and the Spirillae all linked up. I wasn't able, just because of the computing power of the computer I was on at the time. Maybe if I got a brand new computer. Anyway, I wasn't able to do what you see on the right, which is put spirals around spirals, because look at the figure 133 there. All you're seeing is the second Spirillae, right? It's spiraling around the Spirillae, the Spirilla, the spirals around the spiral. Oh, no, there is 3 levels. We see 3 levels of spirals, right? Of Spirillae around the spiral. The big coil around the spiral, and then the smaller, and then the really tiny ones. That's only 3 levels. And so you can imagine how extraordinarily fine it gets when you get all the way to 7, let alone 10. And that these would be ablaze with energy. just suffusing the entire atom with this great electrical potency, because it would be like this almost all-pervading filament. Like if you're talking about, say, even the fifth and sixth Spirilla, which we're working on. You know, when you're making soul contact, you're working on another way of seeing it. Occult science would say that your soul ray, as you come in contact with your soul ray, that it is bringing into activity the energy, the phohatic fluid that flows through the fifth Spirilla, which would be twice more removed from what you see in this super close-up figure 133. So, you know, kind of extraordinary stuff. From one view, it just seems like incredibly technical. From another view, you can see that you're looking at the demonstration of the phohatic life principle at work, and it's quite amazing.
Francis, I have a quick question, and then Tuia's got her hand up. Have you tried to apply the colors that he gives you here? The thermal colors of red and orange, and then the electrical colors of the blue-green, and then blue, and then you see where I'm getting those colors?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and if there are other illustrations of this. This is the original, so that's what I've included here. But there are folks who have actually colored these. And like I said, I did a rotatable 3D model that you could fly through and rotate around and take a look at. And, you know, it didn't, because I didn't have the side view, I don't know how deep this thing is. So I just, you know, aesthetically chose a dimension. And I colored the spirals and spirillae in accordance with, you know, the descriptions as best I could. It's still primitive. You know, when you get into detail, what seems like incredibly complex to look at this, when you actually get into it, you would like even more information, you know. But it's a fascinating, I would show it to you, but I can't because the GoToWebinar doesn't have video, you know. If I was on another platform, we could rotate it around and take a look at it. But there is integrity to the structure in 3D. I can attest to that. So
I just thought that was fascinating, that there is so much detail in that, and he did it in 18 something.
As it's just before the Secret Doctrine, I think it came out, like 1885 is the date that's coming to mind that this was
something like that.
Printed.
Okay, Tuia's got her hand up. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Tuia.
Go ahead.
Hello, Tuia.
Tuia? Do I have the wrong one? You're there twice. Can you talk now, Tuia?
I'm sure she's trying. Connection problem, I'm sure. Okay, as soon as we can hear you, we'll come back to you.
Okay, and then I have another comment. Let me read it. Diana says the central axis is like Shushuma and Ida and Pingala at the sides.
Interesting. Yeah. And there, you know, well, could be a relationship, because it's a structure by which the energy of consciousness is able to flow, you know, the life energy of particular levels of consciousness. And so in that way, it has a direct relation to those three systems. And, you know, yeah. Anyone else?
Yes, Victor has his hand up. Go ahead, please, Victor.
Yeah, Francis. Could you read what some of those words are that is encircled in the circles there? I can barely make out a few of them.
Oh gosh, let's see if if we go
Just-
back
Just pick a few and say what they are.
here. Let's see if we can see here. You're seeing it. I see blue, green. Let's see. I don't have a cursor to, unfortunately. Go to webinar. It gave me a cursor for a while and then took it away on another iteration of the program. So, but I'm seeing. Let's see here now.
I'm seeing negative, thermo, spiral.
I read that. I'm right with you.
On the top part, and then above the third one of those, it says blue, green, blue,
Right.
indigo, blue, indigo,
There you go.
violet, indigo, violet, and then dark violet at the top.
Excellent. Excellent.
I can read that part.
Okay. Excellent. So, we can easily make ray associations there. We won't go into that detail, but you can see that there's almost certainly energetic ray associations. I mean, the very fact that there's 7 spirals, they could literally be carrying the electrical force of that ray, and then the Spirilla, more complex iterations of that. It's a magnificent system. I would happily read a book on this if there was one available. It's really interesting.
There might be, if you could only read everything that's packed into that little atom.
Yeah, exactly. You can read it all. I've pulled it up. Yeah, sure, Victor. You get a little idea. I read everything that's in this about the atom in this Principles of Light and Color. It's a wonderful little book. So yeah, I've quoted you some of the ideas he has. But for now, we're gonna have to leave this behind.
Okay, we have other comments here, just real quick.
Yeah.
Britta says or asks, isn't the atomic Spirilla equal with the 3 aspects, rays 1, 2, and 3?
Well, it's an open question. It by atomic Spirilla. You mean just this whole system? Is that what you're meaning? If so, I would say, given the discussion I just had with Michael, that the 3 what are called extra spirals very possibly are carrying those rays of aspect, and that they are then further broken into the intra spirals, which carry the 7 rays. And that's interesting too, because of course the 7 would have to include the upper 3, but if you've done a little study with the rays, you can see how that works, especially on monadic levels, because there is a subset of rays 1, 2, and 3 that exists at a lower level from the fundamental rays of aspect. I hope that answered your question a little bit. Anyone else?
And then let me see. Tuia says she tried, but we couldn't do it. So her question is,
you can always punch in the chat box if you want to take the time.
She did. She says, don't we have 4 levels?
4 levels of etheric reality, you mean?
I don't
Is
know.
that, yeah, 4 etheric levels. And I haven't read anything about exactly.
Hey, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey.
So I was just checking, thinking when you, Francis, said that we have 4 levels, but 3 levels. But don't we have there these 4 spirals, the very big ones,
Mm-hmm.
what you can see there on the left.
Right.
And then you have around that, do you see?
You mean that are you talking about the 4 levels of Spirilla, the little coils?
Yes.
Yeah, actually.
Spirals, or how do you call them?
Yeah, Spirilla, and the spirals are like the big spirals that make up the whole atom.
Right.
And then the Spirilla are the coils that go around that. So on the left, what you have is one Spirilla shown. One, all the spirals, and then just one Spirilla, right? On the right, it shows a super close-up of, and it shows 3 Spirilla. But DK teaches us that, in fact, there are 7 and 10 Spirilla. So they would be.
Okay, I was just then when you said about 3 levels, and I was starting to count all of those spirals and circles and so forth.
Yeah.
But anyway, I understand now what you say.
Okay, good, good. I mean, I would be happy, spending the next 3 years on a supercomputer just building this illustration with all 10 levels. To me, that would be my definition of it. But that's the way to go. Thank you.
And then Francis says, were there any comments on the clarion notes or sound nature of these different Spirillae?
Clarion notes, the sound nature. I see. Yeah, that would be the sound nature. No, is the short answer. I would imagine, because wherever you have color, you have sound. Sound and color only break out at the lowest levels. On the higher levels, certainly in the fourth, 6th, and 7th Spirillae, you're going to have a sound breakout. My guess is that you're going to have it on all 7 levels. And it would make sense that since there are 7 notes in an octave, that they are directly related. We know this about the rays, for instance, that they have associated notes, right? A being the note of the second ray, I believe. And we have a few others that, but he doesn't give them all. So very, very possibly, if you were to be clairaudient as well as clairvoyant, you would hear this atom sing, be my guess.
Okay, and then...
we have no direct quote. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jeremy has his hand up.
Yes, Jeremy.
Do you have any thoughts about string theory and current physics or quark theory in relationship to this model?
Well, I haven't tried to relate it to this model. String theory I find to be wonderful because just like it's sort of like the next iteration of what Einstein, proved, basically, that the illusory nature, or the maiavic, to be more correct, the maiavic nature of physical substance, that somehow the idea that stuff exists as, the way we all think of stuff as being, as having physical properties as such, when in fact, they're just configurations of energy. So when you go inside a quark, at least so we're told, you find these extraordinary ringlets of electrical energy that are called strings, and that they interact in very specific ways and require, this I love, they require, you can tell the inherent 6-ray, sorry guys, they require 10 dimensions in order to, scientifically be plausible, or I should say formulaically be plausible. I'm not a math head, but, I love this stuff on a philosophical level. and that it doesn't work. String theory doesn't work in 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions, but somehow, and I don't know the math behind this, when they pumped it up to 10 dimensions, suddenly it works. Well, guess what? DK tells us there are 10 dimensions cosmically. So that correlation is, of course, exciting to me. Whenever you can get, some direct correlation between science and the ageless wisdom, it's always a thrill. And well, what you have here is these 10 spirillae, which could possibly relate to dimensionality, because after all, they do in a sense define a further level of dimension. And these dimensions aren't necessarily like 3D space dimensions. They can, like for instance, there's this one theory that you have to go into these very, very tiny realms before you can come into these little areas. They're like little rings that throw you into a different dimensionality. Of course, science does not embrace consciousness. So you're going to have and so you're going to have a break right there. This system that we're looking at here, the nature of the electrical fluid that runs through these ever finer spirillae are brought to life through higher levels of consciousness, right? And so my guess is that the same thing is true with these electrical rings called strings, and how they interact. But they're just in the embryonic stages of discovering this. Of course, they've never seen one. All they've done is extrapolated the effect, through the influence on the quarks and the muons and klingons. No, that was a joke. And which make up, protons in the nucleus of an atom and neurons. So that's about all I can do for you. I'm not a scientist.
Thank you very much. It's great.
Oh, okay, great, Jeremy. And if you want to speak to that, you're welcome to.
Well, my only thought is, and it's very simplistic, is that string theory is, pretty close to a spiral, or one of the spirals.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. What I've read and seen about them is that they require a certain geometric structure in order to function within. So it's almost like a form, and it's like a third and second principle kind of thing going on, but I can't really speak to it much beyond that. But if indeed they require a spiral, then here we have a definite correlation here. Wouldn't you just love to have a long lunch with DK and ask him some of these questions, or KH?
Yes.
Or even Babbitt, for that matter. Maybe someday, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes. Antonella says, with the fractal equations maths, it should be possible someday to show to our mind and eyes the 7 and 10 levels of spirillae or dimensions.
I absolutely agree with you. A lot of this has to do with intent. Mathematicians have to have an intent also. They've been after the unified theory forever, right? In fact, that's mostly defines their intent, which is really a great intent, because certainly it exists, but what they don't realize is that it's not just a physical phenomenon. It's not just something that could be measured by their instruments. They're going to have to expand their understanding before they come to a unified theory. And so when they reposition, or see, how can I say it? When they ask the question in a different way, then they'll be able to explore it and possibly come up with results that, as you suggest, Antonella, could affirm, through literal equations. It exists, because if this is real, then it is definable mathematically. So, yeah, thank you, Antonella. Anyone else? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Britta
go ahead.
says, according to esoteric healing, there is this system of the Spirilla, but also a system of nadis working on another level. Any esoteric healers on board? Is your question?
Yeah, it would be, lovely to hear something about the connection between nadis and Spirilla. Certainly there would have to be. Nadis are the next most etheric level of the nerves, of course, and are recognized by Oriental medicines as being electrical points in our body, right? And they don't, they're used by healers quite effectively all over the world. They are, for instance, defined where acupuncture is how and where acupuncture needles are used, right? So it's very much a part of our system, but it's a completely esoteric system. We tend to forget that because it is used. And because of that, and because of the electrical phenomenon involved in both the Spirilla and in nadis, I have no doubt that there is a direct connection, but I couldn't tell you. I've never read anything about that. Ponder on this, right? Yes, anyone else?
Yep, hold on just one second, let me get to it. Britta says solely esoteric healing. I don't understand that.
Could you expand on that a little bit? Elaborate, please.
Can you speak it? Oh, relating to the nadis. Can you speak at all, Britta? She doesn't have a microphone, and I can't hear. She's unmuted right now, but yeah, you're unmuted. I see your hand up. You're unmuted. She must not be able to talk. Okay.
I mean, if Chico wants to put something in the chat box, that's fine. I can, there's no question that nadis are not only involved in esoteric healing, but they form the basis of probably the most advanced level of esoteric healing that is currently being practiced today, right? And therefore form the promise of a bridge into what is to come. For instance, the ability to perceive and work with these Spirilla and system of atoms, right? But, again, I can't speak to any knowledge of direct relationship between the two, except to say that they certainly would be related because of their electrical nature.
Okay, Victor's got his hand up, but we also have a comment from Michael. Michael M. He says, I seem to recall that the 6th and 7th Spirilla are yet to be activated.
Oh, yeah. Well, are yet by who? The 6th Spirilla, Michael and I were musing is probably triadal. It's what DK says is that the soul ray activates the 5th and 6th Spirilla. And, you know, if you want to break that down a little more, it could be that you're talking about the higher mental on the 5th and the triadal levels on the 6th. And so certainly for the overwhelming majority of humanity, these are not activated. It's a question of consciousness. But once you reach those levels, you do, the ray involved with your, you know, your soul ray will activate the 5th and 6th Spirilla when the time comes. I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't directly connected with certain initiations as well. You know, certainly the nature, I mean, can't you imagine that when the rod of initiation comes down for the 3rd initiation, that your 5th and 6th Spirillae aren't intensively activated as a result? It's hard to imagine that they wouldn't be. Right? How can, you know, if they're the means of circulating the consciousness principle or the life energy, you would think that they're key to the process of initiation, even though I don't ever remember having read this, you know. And so when you get up to higher initiations where the monadic principle comes in, certainly the 6th and 7th, most specifically the 7th, is going to be a part of that process as well, you know. So yes, and if you look at it from the point of view of root races, which is, you know, time and space and where we are right now in our evolution, you know, we're in the 5th subrace of the 5th root race. You could say that from that point of view, yes, those 6th and 7th are not activated yet, as a rule, at the level of the you could say the median level of the root races as they exist now, right? So you can look at it.
And that's what Michael typed in as you were right before you said it. And they correlate with the 6th and 7th races.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, which Michael is this?
That was Michael M. Michael Mottram.
Oh, okay, great. Good to hear from you, Michael.
And then Victor has
fascinating stuff.
You're self-muted. Well, I just muted you again. There you go. You should be able to talk now, Victor.
Thank you. About 13 years ago, I believe, was possibly in that area, 3 American physicists were awarded the Nobel Prize for a theory regarding the atom. They called it quantum chromodynamics. And when I went online and read up on what they'd found, they actually, well, it's really strange. I don't read the paper, but I was in this person's house and the newspaper was laying on the table, and for some reason I was drawn to the paper and I picked it up, and here's this article. And so I went online and started doing research on what it was, and I concluded they found 4 of the 7 rays. And I considered, well, there's 3 more, and I considered maybe I ought to call them or write them or something, tell them that there's 3 more to find. And I was told to not bother. And the next year, they found the other 3.
Yeah, that's great. You probably told them on another level, Victor. Good job.
I thought that was funny. But you know, I just wonder, you know, these guys are physicists, and if they would look at this model, I wonder if it would jive with what they have theorized or whatever. It'd be interesting to see.
It sure would be. You know, that's the purpose of think tanks, right? Get a bunch of esotericists and a bunch of scientists together and have them figure stuff out, because so often the limitations are created by the you could say the structure of the thinking of the discipline that they're involved in, you know, and that's what think tanks are about, is to expand that. But thank you, Victor, for that. Anyone else?
I just wanted to add that you've got that address down there, the Alliances for Humanity Babbitt book. I have put that in the chat box again. So if any of you want to just copy that, that URL that's down there. You've got it in your chat box. Okay?
Yeah, it's a good read. It's not, I found him very readable. It's quick, not difficult at all to read. It's, so, and you can just thumb through it and find areas that you are interested in, including this. It's only a few pages on the atom. And he develops the idea of this Spirilla in his own way. But of course, DK has gone much deeper with it. It helps to be a master of wisdom. And as a result, I sort of just went with what he has said. If you really want to, if this fascinates you, do a word search in DK for Spirilla. And there's a surprisingly large number of, something like 75 hits on that, and you'll get a lot of information. I've used 4 or 5 of the quotes, but there's a lot more. And I think you'll come into some real awareness of this subject if you do that. Okay. Anything else before we move on?
Yeah. Michael says, oh no, sorry, Antonella. Maybe you put 3 to the Babbitt name in the link and it seems not to work. Oh, do I not have the link right?
You know what you can also do?
SWW Alliances for Humanity, books, Babbitt. I have the same link that you have. Let me see if it works for me. 2 T's. Peppercock says 2 T's. Maybe. Let me see if it works for me.
Okay, hang on. Let me cut through this. Google Principles of Light and Color.
Oh, there's 3 T's in Babbitt.
Oh. Really?
No.
It shouldn't be.
They're in the link that you gave me, there were 3 T's. So that's what you have to do to fix it. It's only 2 T's at the very end where it says Babbitt.
Oh, sorry about that, guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
My bad.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. You can also just simply Google Principles of Light and Color by Edwin Babbitt, and the PDF will come up right at the top of the page of your Google results. So you can do it that way too, right? Either way, that's the problem. URLs are, let's see, what was it? Joe Campbell said that they're, that they're like a Jehovah level deity, a very angry God. The computer gods, because they will breach no error at all. I always enjoyed that. Anyone else? Nope. Okay. Let's move on. Okay. We still have a little bit of time. So let's go back to the main text. And could we get a reader for, now we're going all the way back to, this section on philosophy. So you have to pull your mind back to these. Remember let me get back through these just to refresh your memory. Here's where the 12 philosophers that were quoted, and they're divided among empiricists, and then those who were able to use abstract mind and the intuition to understand the higher sources of philosophy. And in my mind, it was really von Schelling in his Science of the Absolute that got closest, though others, were definitely worthy of mention in that way, including Cicero. So now we go all the way back up here again.
Scott, can you read that for us? There you go.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
The 6 headings under which the disciplines of philosophy are commonly classified are metaphysics, which deals with such abstract subjects as cosmology, theology, and the nature of being. Logic, which deals with the laws governing rational thinking, or as it has been called, the doctrines of fallacies. Ethics, which is the science of morality, individual responsibility, and character, concerned chiefly with an effort to determine the nature of good. Psychology, which is devoted to investigation and classification of those forms of phenomena referable to a mental origin. Epistemology, which is the science concerned primarily with the nature of knowledge itself and the question of whether it may exist in an absolute form. And aesthetics, which is the science of the nature of and the reactions awakened by the beautiful, the harmonious, the elegant, and the noble.
Thanks, Scott. So, thoughts or questions? Of these headings, metaphysics is probably what comes most quickly to mind when we think of the ageless wisdom teachings. But in fact, any true esoterically inclined spiritual discipline, such as esoteric Buddhism or theosophy, embraces all these 6 disciplines. For instance, to gain any real understanding of a metaphysical subject, we must apply philosophical logic. For example, in DK, though we tend to focus on the content of DK's teachings, it is the logical organization of his writings that allows us to relate the various parts to each other and finally to the whole. In fact, the longer one reads DK, the more apparent the internal logic of his structure becomes. Furthermore, often the structure itself reveals otherwise unstated teachings. If metaphysics is the what, logic is in some ways the how, thereby providing a further means by which we may interpret that which is presented. Philosophical logic includes both critical analysis and intuitional reflection, though many of the philosophers we looked at would only recognize the critical analysis aspect. When DK says ponder on this, he is suggesting that we apply philosophical logic on a higher turn of the spiral. Thoughts or questions on this? By the way, the doctrine of fallacies described in the logic heading has to do with the use of false premises in one's thought processes, which inevitably lead to false conclusions. Any thoughts or questions? The rest of the headings are pretty much self-explanatory, except perhaps epistemology, which is concerned with the nature of knowledge itself. This includes the investigation of what distinguishes beliefs justified by philosophical logic, in other words, that has withstood some rigorous examination, right? That's philosophical logic. And whether knowledge exists in and of itself without the human mind to perceive or interpret it. Or does it take humans in order for there to be knowledge? That's another big philosophical question under this heading of epistemology. Of course, many traditional philosophies see both logic and epistemology as rigorous intellectual disciplines, but theosophy teaches us that all 6 of these disciplines can be demonstrated at progressively higher levels of consciousness, formulated first in the lower mind, then through development of the abstract mind and the intuition, the dawning of a truer awareness moves one from knowledge to wisdom and beyond. Any thoughts about this? Or any of these 6? Okay, then. Let's move on to the next paragraph. And we need a reader for this, please.
Okay, Rebecca, can you read that for us, please? I don't hear Rebecca, so let's see. Pepper, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Plato regarded philosophy as the greatest good ever imparted by divinity to man. In the 20th century, however, it has become a ponderous and complicated structure of arbitrary and irreconcilable notions, yet each substantiated by almost incontestable logic. The lofty theorems of the old academy, which Iamblichus likened to the nectar and ambrosia of the gods, have been so adulterated by opinion, which Heraclitus declared to be a falling sickness of the mind, that the heavenly mead would now be quite unrecognizable to this great Neoplatonist. Convincing evidence of the increasing superficiality of modern scientific and philosophic thought is its persistent drift towards materialism. When the great astronomer Laplace was asked by Napoleon why he had not mentioned God in his Traité de la Mécanique Céleste, the mathematician naively replied, "Sire, I had no need for that hypothesis."
Any thoughts or questions about this? I love the idea that opinion is a falling sickness of the mind. Right? Now there's somebody who's definitely mentally polarized who would say something like that. Pretty straightforward paragraph. MPH contrasts those philosophies that are conceived and developed only through and by means of the lower mind with those that are perceived through abstract mind and intuition. It becomes so clear when you read some of the works of these people, you know, the level by which their philosophies were developed, right? The method by which their philosophies were developed.
Francis?
Yeah.
I have one little thing. Iamblichus is said to have been an earlier incarnation of Master Hilarion, and he was a very prominent Neoplatonist and a great theurgist. In other words, he had great power in dealing with the summoning of internal lives. He was not just an intellectual, he was a practical man, as Hilarion would have to be in his work of science. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that Iamblichus-Hilarion connection.
Yeah, okay. Fourth ray, huh?
Fifth ray.
Oh, fifth ray with
Hilarion, you know. Yeah.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he likened philosophy to the nectar, ambrosia of the gods.
It's hard to say about the ray because, you know, he was so fourth ray in a previous incarnation as Paul, you know. He was a Scorpio with incredible fourth ray. But basically a first ray, fifth ray kind of monad. And he could really work the inner worlds. I guess that's the way I could say it.
That's fascinating idea, working the inner worlds.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, next paragraph. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Okay, let's try. Rebecca, again, can you read now?
Yes, I've now got a dog barking, but
that's all
right. In his treatise on atheism, Sir Francis Bacon tersely summarizes the situation thus: a little philosophy inclineth. Maybe we better try somebody else.
Okay.
I think he's barking in response to your speaking, maybe
right,
so.
Right. Risa, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
In his treatise on atheism, Sir Francis Bacon tersely summarized the situation thus: a little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion. The Metaphysics of Aristotle opens with these words: all men naturally desire to know. To satisfy this common urge, the unfolding human intellect has explored the extremities of imaginable space, without and the extremities of imaginable self within, seeking to estimate the relationship between the one and the all, the effect and the cause, nature and the groundwork of nature, the mind and the source of the mind, the spirit and the substance of the spirit, the illusion and the reality.
Thank you. Thoughts or questions? MPH cites some provocative polarities here. But we're looking at about a quarter till the hour. That's one thing we have in common all around the globe here. It's a quarter till. So I'm going to, because I know especially down under that some of you have a day yet ahead of you that you need to get ready for. So we'll pull the plug here and take up MPH's ideas, the extremities of imaginable space without and the extremities of imaginable self within, I find particularly provocative. So we'll be spending a little bit of time here. So we'll pick it up next time. And I thank you all for attending, and I very much look forward to the second webinar on secret teachings of all ages, which any problem with the first Sunday, BL?
Not that I know of. As far as that's what I've got scheduled right now, the first Sundays of 1 September.
Right. So you can generally, you'll be notified otherwise, but generally these will happen on the first Sunday. And if, for those of you who haven't been involved in the Secret Doctrine series, those take place on the third Sunday. So you have something to do every other week. Okay. Thanks very much again, and blessings to you all. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Francis. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, B.O.